Amina lived most of her days in the background, moving quietly through the busy city of Lagos. She was not the kind of woman who raised her voice or fought for attention. People often overlooked her, including her own husband, Tund. On the surface, they looked like a respectable couple, Tund with his sharp suits and loud confidence, and Amina with her soft smile and gentle ways. But behind the smiles, their marriage carried a weight that only she felt. Tund was ambitious, always chasing the next big deal, the next chance to prove he was better than everyone else. He loved to talk about his plans, his money, and his future. In his eyes, he was the star of his own story. Amina, on the other hand, was the quiet shadow by his side. He often called her useless, sometimes as a joke, sometimes as a sharp reminder of how little he thought of her. It was a word that cut her deeply, though she never let him see the wound. Still, Amina supported him in her own ways. She kept the house steady, listened to his endless boasting, and stood by him even when he ignored her. She knew when to stay silent and when to nod, playing the role he believed she was born to play. What he never noticed, or maybe never cared to notice, was the intelligence hidden behind her calm eye. To him, she was just a woman who sat at home. To her, she was far more, though for now, she chose to keep it in the shadows. The dining table was full that evening, laughter and voices rising above the clinking of plates and glasses. Tund's siblings and a few close friends had come over, and the house smelled of jollof rice, grilled chicken, and fried plantain. Amina moved around quietly, making sure everyone had enough to eat, refilling glasses, and smiling politely when someone thanked her. She preferred to blend into the background, but tonight she was the target of attention she didn't ask for. As the conversation shifted to work and business, Tund's voice grew louder, as it often did when he had an audience. He leaned back in his chair, boasting about the deals he was chasing and the future he was carving out for himself. Everyone laughed at his jokes, nodding at his confidence. Then, without warning, he pointed his fork toward Amina, smirking as if she were the punchline of a joke. "Look at her," he said loudly. "My dear wife here doesn't understand anything about business. She just sits at home and eats. At least she cooks well. That's her only real talent." The table erupted in laughter. Some tried to hide their smiles, others laughed openly, not wanting to go against Tund. Amina's hands froze where they rested on the edge of the table. The words stung like fire, and her cheeks burned with humiliation. She lowered her eyes quickly, hiding the storm rising inside her chest. She wanted to defend herself, to tell them all that she was not just some housewife with nothing in her head. But instead, she forced a small smile, the kind that looked polite but carried no joy. She swallowed her pride with the same calmness she had mastered over the years. Fighting back would only give them another reason to mock her, and she refused to give Tund the satisfaction of seeing her break. Still, inside her heart something stirred. His laughter, the way his siblings joined in, the careless mockery, it all lit a fire she could no longer ignore. If only they knew the truth she carried quietly within her. If only they knew the nights she spent reading, learning, and preparing. If only they knew about the documents locked away, the knowledge she had carefully kept to herself. She looked up for a brief second, her eyes meeting Tund. He was still laughing, proud of the way he had reduced her in front of everyone. She said nothing, but her gaze held a calm strength, a promise that one day the tables would turn. The others didn't notice, but if they had, they would have seen that Amina was not defeated. The evening continued with more food, more laughter, and more of Tund's endless bragging. Amina moved quietly, serving plates and clearing dishes, the picture of a submissive wife. But behind her silence, her mind was awake, sharper than anyone in that room imagined. She knew her time would come. For now, she stayed in the shadows waiting. When the noise of the world faded and the house grew quiet, Amina stepped into her true life. Behind the calm face everyone saw, she carried a secret world that no one, not even Tund, had ever imagined. While he laughed with his friends and mocked her for being useless, she spent her nights reading thick books and scribbling notes by the soft glow of her lamp. Years before, while Tund was chasing quick money, Amina had taken online courses in finance and business management. She had poured herself into learning about investments, markets, and the kind of strategies that built real wealth. It hadn't been easy. She studied in silence, often hiding her books under the bed or keeping her laptop closed whenever Tund walked in. He would have laughed at her, told her she was wasting her time. So, she let him believe what he wanted while she carried on in secret, determined to prepare herself for a future he could never imagine. Her late father had planted the first seed of this hidden strength. He had been a quiet man, much like her, but with a mind sharp enough to build a small empire of his own. Before he passed away, he made sure Amina had access to certain documents, trusts, and company papers that no one else in the family even knew about. He trusted her, not because she was the eldest or the loudest, but because he saw in her the same patience and intelligence he carried. Now, years later, She worked closely with her father's lawyer, an older man named Mr. Adewale. He had known her since she was a child, and he treated her not as a helpless woman, but as the rightful heir her father had intended her to be. They met in his quiet office in Ikoyi, far from the curious eyes of her husband. She would sit across from him, reviewing balance sheets, company structures, and investment portfolios. He would guide her, explain the legal language, and watch with pride as she absorbed every detail. "You learn fast," he told her once, handing her a folder thick with papers. "Your father would be proud. He knew you were not like the others." Those words stayed with her, fueling her even on the days when Tun's mockery cut the deepest. Because in truth, Amina was not the helpless woman the world thought she was. She knew the value of every signature, every stamped seal on those documents she carefully kept hidden. She understood the numbers behind the businesses that her father had left behind, businesses that, in time, would rise again under her watch. At home, she remained the quiet wife who served food and smiled politely. But when the doors closed and she sat with her files spread out before her, she was something else entirely. She was a woman preparing for the day her silence would end. She was far from useless. In fact, she was holding a power so deep that when it came to light, it would shake everything Tund thought he controlled. Tund came home one evening with a wide grin plastered across his face. He slammed the front door and dropped his car keys on the table like a man who had just conquered the world. His voice carried through the house before Amina even saw him. "Amina," he shouted, his tone full of triumph. "You won't believe the kind of deal I just sealed. This one will put me on the map. People will respect me after this." She walked out from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel, her usual calm expression hiding the curiosity stirring inside her. Tund was in one of his moods again, pacing back and forth, gesturing wildly as if he were already giving a speech to a crowd. "I'm partnering with one of the biggest names in Lagos," he bragged, his chest puffed up. "This signing is going to change everything. From now on, people will see me as a real businessman, not just someone trying his luck. This is the move that makes kings." Amina listened quietly, nodding when his eyes flicked to her for approval. She had learned long ago that silence was the easiest way to survive these speeches. But Tund wasn't satisfied with her calm response. He wanted more. "Do you even understand what I'm talking about?" he asked, laughing as he looked her up and down. "No, of course not. This is real business, Amina. This is not about sitting at home or frying plantain in the kitchen. This is about power, about respect, something you could never understand." His words were sharp, meant to cut, and he delivered them with a smirk, confident she had no reply. The insult hung heavy in the air, but Amina only lowered her eyes, letting the sting sink deep into her heart where he could not see it. On the outside, she stayed still, her voice calm. "That's good, Tund," she said softly. "I'm happy for you." Her quiet tone irritated him even more. He wanted her awe, her admiration, maybe even her envy. Instead, she gave him her usual gentle response, which he mistook for weakness. "You'll see," he said, pointing a finger at her. "When the signing happens, when the cameras flash, everyone will know my name. And you," he chuckled cruelly, "you'll just sit there smiling, not even knowing what's happening." He turned away, already lost in the world of his own dreams, imagining the glory, the money, the respect that would soon be his. Amina stood behind him, her face unreadable. But inside, a fire was burning. She knew about real business, more than he could ever guess. She knew about contracts, ownership papers, and the power of a single signature. She had studied it, prepared for it, lived it behind closed doors. As Tund boasted and laughed, she stayed silent, her hands clasped gently in front of her. But her silence was not weakness. It was patience. The kind of patience that waits for the perfect moment to strike. The stage was being set, and soon, Tund would realize the woman he mocked was the one person he should have never underestimated. The morning of the signing ceremony, Tund strutted around the house like a man about to be crowned king. He wore his finest suit, sprayed on his strongest cologne, and practiced his smile in the mirror. He barely glanced at Amina as he called out, "Get ready. You're coming with me." She paused for a moment, surprised. Normally, he avoided taking her anywhere important. She was the wife who, in his eyes, added no value, the one he often left at home while he shone in public. But today, he wanted her by his side, not as an equal, but as an ornament, proof that he had it all. "You'll sit quietly," he said, adjusting his tie. "Don't embarrass me. Just smile when people look at you." Amina gave her usual nod, hiding the quiet spark in her eyes. She dressed simply but elegantly, her calm presence a sharp contrast to Tund's loud energy. Together they drove through the busy streets of Lagos until the tall glass buildings of Victoria Island rose before. The venue was grand, filled with men in expensive suits and women in glittering dresses. Cameras flashed, waiters moved about with trays of champagne, and the sound of laughter echoed across the hall. As Tund walked in, shoulders squared, many heads turned to greet him. He grinned, soaking up the attention. But when eyes shifted to Amina at his side, whispers started. Why did he bring her? Some murmured. She never comes to these things. Others smirked, assuming she was only there to play the silent wife. Amina heard the whispers but kept her face calm, her hands folded neatly in front of her. Tund basked in the moment, shaking hands, laughing loudly, and introducing himself with exaggerated pride. He rarely bothered to introduce Amina. When he did, it was with a dismissive wave. This is my wife. She doesn't really follow these things, but she insisted on coming. The laughter that followed was meant to be light, but Amina felt the sting in every. Then, just as the ceremony was about to begin, the lawyer walked in. Mr. Adewale, calm and dignified, carried a leather briefcase in one hand. His presence immediately drew attention. Everyone knew he was respected in business circles. He nodded at Amina first, a small but meaningful gesture, before greeting the others. Tund straightened, excitement flashing across his face. Ah, Mr. Adewale, you're right on time. Let's get these papers signed. Today is history. The lawyer smiled politely but said little. He placed the documents on the table in the center of the room, where the partners and guests gathered around. Cameras clicked as the papers were spread out, and Tund leaned forward eagerly, ready to see his name in bold print. But as the pages turned, the murmurs in the room grew louder. Something was different, something Tund had not expected. His grin faltered slightly, confusion flickering across his face. Amina, standing quietly beside him, already knew what was coming. The moment she had been waiting for was finally beginning. The room was buzzing with energy as the documents were laid out on the polished table. Businessmen leaned forward, reporters raised their cameras, and Tund stood at the center of it all, his chest swelling with pride. He was already picturing the headlines with his name splashed across them. This was the moment he had been dreaming of. Mr. Adewale adjusted his glasses and slowly flipped through the pages. His voice was calm but firm as he began reading out the detail. Ownership of the company shall be recognized under the name of, he paused, tapping the paper lightly, Mrs. Amina Oladipo. The hall went silent. For a moment, it was as if no one had heard him correctly. Then, like a wave, whispers rippled through the crowd. Heads turned, eyes widened, and the air grew heavy with shock. Tund froze, his smile vanishing instantly. He blinked rapidly, his face draining of color as he leaned over the table to check the papers himself. His hands shook as he flipped through the pages, scanning the lines again and again, as though reading them differently would change the truth. This must be a mistake, he stammered, his voice cracking. It should be my name. I'm the one handling this deal. Why would her name be here? But the lawyer said nothing more. He simply slid the documents forward for everyone to see. Clear, bold, and undeniable, the ownership belonged to Amina. Gasps filled the hall. Some guests whispered behind their hands. Others stared openly at Amina with newfound interest. Tund's friends looked just as stunned, their eyes darting between him and his wife. Amina stood still, her face calm, her hands resting gently in front of her. She did not gloat, did not smile, did not even look at Tund. Instead, she let the silence do the work, the truth spreading like fire through the room. Tund turned to her, his voice low but trembling. Amina, what is this? Did you know about this? Her eyes met his for the first time that evening. There was no anger in them, no triumph, only a steady calmness that made him feel smaller by the second. She didn't answer, and that silence cut deeper than any words could. Around them, the whispers grew louder. So she's the owner? Someone asked. All this time, another murmured. The weight of the realization was settling in, and Tund's world was beginning to crumble in front of everyone. He tried to laugh it off, but the sound was hollow. This is ridiculous, he muttered. She doesn't know anything about business. How could her name be? But he stopped mid-sentence because no one was laughing with him. The guests were no longer looking at him with admiration. Their eyes were now fixed on Amina, the woman he had called useless. And Amina, still calm and composed, allowed the truth to hang in the air, letting everyone see the beginning of his downfall. The murmurs in the hall grew louder until Mr. Adewale raised a hand for silence. His voice was steady, carrying across the room with quiet authority. There is no mistake, he said firmly. This company was built by the late Chief Oladipo, a man many of you here remember. Before his passing, he placed the majority of shares and full ownership rights in the hands of his daughter, Mrs. Amina Oladipo. She is, and has always been, the rightful owner. The hall erupted. Gasps, shocked whispers. Even a few nervous laughs filled the air. Journalists scribbled furiously in their notebooks, cameras clicking faster now. Every eye turned to Amina, the woman who had just been revealed as the true power behind the company. Tund staggered back a step, his mouth opening and closing without sound. His skin turned pale, sweat forming on his forehead. What do you mean? He stammered, looking from the lawyer to Amina. That's impossible. She stays at home. She knows nothing about this. But the lawyer was unmoved. On the contrary, he replied, she has been involved in every major decision since her father's passing. She has reviewed these documents, understood them, and signed them. Whether you knew or not, Mr. Tund, your wife is the majority shareholder. Without her, this company does not move forward. The crowd gasped again, some nodding in respect, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Business partners who had been eyeing Tund minutes earlier now turned toward Amina, studying her with newfound admiration. Tund's knees nearly buckled as the truth settled in. All those times he mocked her, all those dinners where he laughed at her expense, all the careless words he threw at her. He had been ridiculing the very woman who owned everything he thought was his. He tried one last time, his voice desperate. Amina, say something. This can't be true. You can't even understand these papers. Tell them this is a mistake. At last, Amina lifted her head fully. She didn't raise her voice, didn't let anger spill out. Instead, she spoke in a calm tone that carried across the hall, her words cutting deeper than a shout ever could. Tund, she said softly, maybe the reason you never saw my worth is because you were too busy worshipping your own reflection. A sharp silence followed, broken only by the soft gasps of those who heard her. The line landed like a heavy stone, shifting the balance of power completely. For the first time, Tund had no reply. His lips trembled, but no words came. The hall belonged to Amina now. Guests whispered her name with respect, her calm presence filling the room in a way no loud boast could. Tund lowered his head, humiliated, his once proud image shattered in front of the very people he had wanted to impress. Amina stood tall beside him, no longer the shadow, no longer the silent wife. In that moment, she was the woman who owned it all, and everyone knew it. Tund's world came crashing down right there in the middle of the glittering hall. His mouth was dry, his palms slick with sweat as he tried to pull himself together. He leaned forward, snatched the papers again, and flipped through them as if he could magically erase Amina's name. His voice cracked as he barked. There must be another version of this. These can't be the final papers. But Mr. Adewale's calm reply left no room for doubt. These are the originals, signed and sealed by Chief Oladipo before his passing. Every share, every right, is in your wife's name. Nothing can change that. The finality in his words was like a hammer striking Tund's chest. He looked around desperately, expecting someone to back him up, but all he saw were curious eyes, raised eyebrows, and hidden smiles from those who secretly enjoyed seeing his arrogance crumble. No, Tund whispered, then louder. No, she doesn't know anything. She's not fit for this. She's just, his voice broke. He couldn't bring himself to say the word again. Not here, not now, not when everyone had seen the truth with their own eyes. While he stumbled, the atmosphere in the room shifted. A businessman in a navy suit cleared his throat and turned toward Amina. Mrs. Oladipo, he said with a polite nod, it's an honor to finally meet you. We've heard of your father's legacy. It seems you carry it well. Another partner leaned in respectful. We look forward to working with you directly, he added, ignoring Tund completely. Each word cut into Tund like a knife. The attention he had craved all his life was flowing to Amina, the woman he had belittled over and over again. His chest heaved, his hands trembled, and he felt as though the ground beneath him was splitting apart. Amina remained calm, her posture straight, her voice steady as she thanked the men graciously. She didn't gloat, didn't throw her triumph in his face. She simply accepted the respect as though she had always deserved it, which, in truth, she had. For Tund, the humiliation was unbearable. He saw the pity in some eyes, the satisfaction in others. His siblings, who had once laughed at Amina's expense, sat frozen, unable to meet his gaze. Friends who used to clap him on the back now shifted uncomfortably, their loyalty quietly draining away. He tried to speak again, but the words stuck in his throat. His pride, the very thing he had built his life around, had shattered in front of everyone. The useless wife he had mocked was the very backbone of the empire he thought he controlled. As the cameras flashed, capturing every moment, Tund realized there was no saving face. His downfall was complete, and the world had witnessed it. Meanwhile, Amina, calm and unshaken, stood in her true light for the first time. The power had always been hers. She had only waited for the right moment to let the world see it. The days that followed the signing ceremony felt like a new chapter had begun, not just for Amina, but for everyone who knew her. The whispers from that night traveled fast across Lagos. The story of the silent wife, who turned out to own the company, spread through business circles and family gatherings alike. Wherever she went, people looked at her differently, no longer as Tund's quiet shadow, but as Amina Oladipo, the woman in control. Meetings that once revolved around Tund now revolved around her. Business partners who had barely acknowledged her presence before now leaned in eagerly when she spoke. At her first official board meeting, she walked in with her head held high, dressed in a simple but elegant outfit. There was no need for loud colors or flashy jewelry. Her confidence was enough. When she spoke about financial plans and market strategies, her voice was clear and steady. Every suggestion was sharp, practical, and grounded in the knowledge she had been building for years. By the end of that meeting, even the most skeptical directors were nodding in agreement. At home, the shift was just as clear. Tun no longer barked orders across the house or dismissed her with careless words. He moved quietly, like a man who had been stripped of his crown. Amina didn't have to shout or demand anything. Her silence alone carried weight now. When she spoke, Tund listened, his arrogance replaced with a wary respect he never thought he'd give her. Family gatherings changed too. The same siblings who once laughed when Tund mocked her now greeted her warmly, their smiles wide and voices full of respect. They asked her questions, sought her advice, even tried to stay close to her side during conversations. Amina noticed the shift but didn't gloat. She simply carried herself with grace, never forgetting how easily they had turned their backs on her before. Even friends who once looked past her now came with compliment. "We always knew you were smart," some said, though Amina knew their words were half-truths. Still, she accepted their newfound loyalty with calm detachment. Respect, once denied, was now unavoidable. In small but important ways, she began to assert herself at home. She made decisions about finances openly, no longer hiding her knowledge. She set boundaries, choosing when and how she wanted to speak. Tund, though clearly struggling with the loss of his pride, no longer dared to interrupt or belittle her. The house felt different, lighter for her, heavier for him. The balance of power had shifted, and everyone could feel it. Amina was no longer the woman in the shadows. She had stepped into her rightful place, carrying herself with a quiet strength that spoke louder than Tund's years of boasting ever could. Those who once ignored her now leaned toward her, and those who mocked her now lowered their voices in her presence. For Amina, it was not about revenge. It was about finally being seen for who she truly was. And now, no one could ever call her useless again. Amina often thought back to the years when she stayed quiet, letting Tund's voice fill every room. People mistook her silence for weakness, but she now understood it had been her greatest strength. In her silence, she had learned. In her silence, she had prepared. And when the right moment came, that silence turned into power no one could deny. Tund, once so loud and arrogant, now moved with his head lowered. He no longer mocked her in front of friends or dismissed her with careless words. The humiliation he suffered at the signing ceremony had cut deep, and though he still struggled with his pride, he had no choice but to respect the woman he had spent years underestimating. Every time he looked at her, he was reminded that the empire he had tried to claim was never his to begin with. It belonged to her, and always had. Amina, however, did not waste her days reliving his downfall. She focused instead on her new role, walking into boardrooms with the same calm confidence that had carried her through the storm. Cameras followed her, flashes lighting up her face as journalists rushed to capture her every step. The once invisible wife was now the headline, the center of attention, the woman everyone wanted to hear from. As she left the boardroom one afternoon, the sound of cameras clicking filled the air. She walked with steady steps, her head held high, her expression calm but unshakable. People no longer whispered "useless" behind her back. Now they said her name with respect. Amina had risen from the shadows, not by shouting, but by knowing when to wait and when to strike. She was no longer the woman in the background. She was the woman who owned it all.